Welcome to the review meeting of our research unit Multitroph, or in Chinese symbols, Lin Wang. Lin means forest. You probably recognize this symbol as forest trees, and Wang as network. So you should read our logo as Multitrophic Forest Network. I have the pleasure to introduce the research unit to you, and I'm leading the research unit together with my Chinese partner, Zhaodong Zhu. But first of all, I have to convince you that biodiversity research in forests is super important today. So forests are crucial for ecosystem services provisioning, and forests provide the habitat for the largest share of global terrestrial biodiversity. Therefore, forests are a center of scientific but also societal attention. And forest restoration and also the diversification, turning forest monocultures to species-rich mixtures of forests, are key in global action plans, but also in policy recommendations. Biodiversity ecosystem functioning experiments, in short BEF research, can inform these diversification programs for future resilient forest management. BEF research showed the importance of tree species richness for productivity, and we show this from our experiment. Here we have a forest monoculture until a gradient until 24 tree species, and we see that the stand volume increment increases with tree species richness, and it even increases more from one year to the other. Tree diversity does not only promote productivity, but it also promotes carbon sequestration. So tree BEF research can inform climate change mitigation strategies. We do not only know that plant diversity shapes productivity or carbon sequestration, we know from grassland experiments that plant diversity shapes diversity and functioning at higher trophic levels. Here, for example, from the Jena experiment, where many of the PIs of Multitroph also contributed to, we showed that plant species richness increased below ground and above ground the abundance and species richness of other trophic levels. So often these relationships were positive, but sometimes also negative. For example, here the species richness of invading herb species that came into the plots were negatively related to plant species richness. We do not only show this for grasslands, we could also show from our tree biodiversity experiment that tree species richness directly shapes arthropod species richness. And this brings me to our overall objective of Multitroph. This is to better understand how and which kind of biodiversity stabilizes forest ecosystems and their functions and related services. We need to study ecological networks across multiple trophic levels. And to show you what we mean by an ecological network, I would like to introduce you to our tree aphid ant interactions that we studied in BEF China. So first of all, we have the first trophic levels. These are the plants. They are interacting with leaf-sucking aphids, and they are interacting with ants because the ants are interested in the sugar that are in the honeydew of the aphids. And here are the different plant species, and with the width we show how often a plant species occur in the plot. The same is for the second trophic level. And here we show how often the second trophic level interact with the first trophic level. For example, this aphid species interact with many different tree species, and this one only interacts with one tree species. And this together is a bipartite trophic network, and here we have another bipartite trophic network. Here I like to show you how these interaction networks are translated into biodiversity ecosystem functioning relationships. Again, here's a network. We call this a redundant network because here the different herbivorous species, in this case, they are all interacting with many of the tree species. This relates into such an interaction network with many different interactions, and to translate this in the diversity functioning relationship, we show that this is exponential and redundant. This means when one species here of the aphid got lost, it doesn't matter for the trees in general. On the other hand, we have very specialized or complementary networks. This means that, for example, one herbivore species only feeds on one tree species or maybe on two tree species. And we call this a complementary network, a very simple network, and this translates into a linear relationship between diversity and functioning. And when a species got lost, like this one, then the function for this tree species also got lost. So usually we are also somewhere in the middle, and we like to find out for the different bipartite networks where we are in this curve. Our overall principle in multi-troph is that we use these trophic networks to identify niche overlaps in producer, the trees, to consumer, in this case herbivore interactions. So here we have the functional niches, the tree leaves as resources, and the performance of, for example, herbivorous species. And we show just the overlap of two species. And in a redundant system, in a very redundant systems, there is a strong niche overlap, and it becomes more niche confirmed when it's more specialized, slightly more specialized. But in a complementary system, in a really specialized complementary systems, the niches are separated and non-conform. When it's relatively generalized, we see a slight overlap of niches. So our overall hypotheses are, first, the degree of complementarity in ecological networks across the different trophic levels predicts the magnitude and also the resilience of forest multifunctionality. And second, the cascading effects of tree diversity via multidiversity, element stoichiometry, and of course network structure determine the multifunctionality and in the end the ecosystem services. And now I introduce you to the general research framework of multi-troph. So to understand multidiversity and multifunctionality, we have to study the crucial trophic relationships in forests. And here we see an overview of the functional groups or the BEF relationships that were studied in BEF China. And in multi-troph, we like to study, or we plan to study, the following functional groups or the BEF relationship of different functional groups: below ground and above ground. Below ground from bacteria, saprophytic fungi, from decomposers, from herbivores including pollinators, and from predators, and finally from parasitoids. And above this, we need soil baseline data in order to understand these BEF relationships. Beyond all these BEF trophic relationships, we will study the underlying ecological networks. We will study the diversity of wood decomposers, tree diversity, herbivore-predator interaction networks. Here we will also study the element stoichiometry or the element flow from the soils to higher trophic levels, and also to ant nutrient networks. We will also relate the wood decomposers or the networks to the networks of trophic interactions in cavity nesting bees and wasps. And this is also related to the ants. And we will relate the ant or the ants to predator seed predation networks. Multi-Dwarf is structured in two central projects. The first central project for coordination, and here we apply for a part-time administrative coordinator based in Germany and a full-time scientific coordinator based in China and Germany. And the second central part is the synthesis and data management project. Here we apply for full-time postdoc for synthesis and a part-time postdoc for data management. And in between we have 6 sub-projects, and for all of them we apply for one PhD position. We selected the research fields and also the researchers in Multi-Dwarf according to their complementary expertises in K-functional groups, according to their excellence in BEV research. They are all experienced BEV researchers, and also some of them are experienced in China, but we also added new researchers. We took care that we included junior researchers, and we have a high share of women among the main PIs. All of this we apply for DFG funding. Each German project has a Chinese partner project, and for this project we apply for additional funding. I'm not going into the details here, but always at the end of each sub-project, when they are presented, you will see if these projects are already funded or if they have already part-time funding or if they have to apply for additional funding.